It is now my pleasure to welcome our main speaker, Justin, from Bakersfield. Oh, you're good. Okay, there's a timer. That's perfect.
There's like welcome music. That's amazing. Thank you guys. My name is Justin. I'm an alcoholic. I want to start by saying thank you for inviting me, Randy. It is a pleasure to be here. You guys are very welcoming. If you ever come to Bakersfield, it's not like that. I'm sorry. They everybody came up and greeted me. It was amazing. That was special. A couple other things. Driving 130 miles on a holiday weekend will test your spirituality on the way over here. And it was 108 degrees when I left. And so it's really nice to be over here. Going to have an experience tonight. My sobriety date is December 15th of 2014. In the last 8.5 years, I took my wife hostage tonight and brought her over here, and she's never heard me speak. So this is we'll see. She may need a ride home, or I may need a ride home. I'm one of those alcoholics. You hear people say that I was alcoholic before I ever took a drink, right? And I'm one of those guys. Like, I think the selfishness and self-centeredness started in my childhood, well before I ever started drinking. There was this. I just an insecurity, and a lot of that has to do with my childhood. I think a lot of that came in with some experiences that I had, but there was just, it was always all about me, and I always felt out of place. And I remember like experiences in preschool and elementary school, and just not feeling right. You know, I grew up in an alcoholic household. My mom drank her entire life. She died of cirrhosis at 54 years old. I got to witness that. Growing up in that and watching her drink the way that she did gave me this delusion of normalcy with drinking well into my adult life, right? Like I remember towards the end of her life, she was in the hospital, and I would drive up to see her, and I would sneak away to go have drinks, or I'd have drinks on the way to go see her before I'd visit her, right? And I never saw anything wrong with that. Like, I didn't see the insanity in that, you know? It wasn't until much later that I started looking at that, and I understood my powerlessness, and I understood the delusion that I was living under, that became very clear to me, you know? So I grew up, was born in Oregon. My mom was drinking. My grandparents raised me till I was 4. And then they had an argument. She grabbed me. We came to California and separated me from the people that had raised me to that point. And ended up marrying a guy. There was an abusive relationship, abusive with me, all the way through my childhood. And I got bounced around a lot between parents. I never drank until I was almost out of high school, right? Even with all that. Towards the end of high school, I remember I went to a party. It was a house party the week before, or a couple months before graduation. My best friend, his parents were out of town. Went over to his house, and we had this house party. And I remember that I had probably 5 or 6 beers. This is the first time that I remember getting drunk. I had 5 or 6 beers, and I went into the bathroom, and I was standing in the bathroom, and I just remember swaying a little bit. And I'm going like, this is cool, you know? And I remember talking to people at that party that I would never talk to in high school. And I remember this just feeling of fitting in. And you hear people talk about this all the time, right? In Bill's story, on the first page, he talks about love, applause, and warm moments sublime with intervals hilarious. And in the middle of it, he discovered liquor. And then if you skip to page 14, he talks about this spiritual experience he has with God there's a paragraph that talks about the great clean wind blowing through and this, and that was that night. That's what alcohol did for me that night, you know? And it set off a couple of years of just excessive drinking, a lot of other things, and moved out. I moved out of the house before graduation. Graduated high school on my own, out living. Was talking to somebody about this. We started college, and couldn't do it. I was working, and I was like, this is, and partied excessively for a couple of years. Would bounce back and forth home to her or to my mom's house. Occasionally, we could live together for about a month and a half, and then it would just go to crap, In my 20s, I think mid-20s, I had been married. I got married very young, got divorced, and I met my wife, and who's here, and I quit drinking. I didn't quit drinking. It just looked different for a little while, right? I didn't go back to moderate or anything like that. It probably went back to heavy a little bit because this love, it was new, and we talked about it once. And she said, you didn't drink when we met, when we got together. And I said, I did. I didn't drink the way I wanted to drink when we got together, and it was because I wanted her to stick around, We got married in 2000 and had some kids, started our life together. 2005, my mom died. I told you guys of cirrhosis. And it set off this level of just self-pity. Like if you had gone through that, right? It was just a train wreck. I was already a train wreck. It got really bad. And it was this, if you had this happen, you would understand, right? None of the, and I want to be very clear about this, none of the consequences, none of the things that happen, none of that has anything to do with my alcoholism. I'm an alcoholic because I don't have a choice, right? The phenomenon of craving, as we talk about, started and exhibited every time I drank. There was times that there was controlled drinking. There was times I'd go to lunch and I'd have one or two drinks and I would leave. Internally, there was this feeling of I can't wait to get back here, right? There was this feeling of, I can't wait to get home. I have to go to this appointment and then I'm going to go home and I can drink again, right? And so the phenomenon of craving was always present. Some of the consequences, some of the things that took place. January of 2006, I went to the one and only treatment center in my career. I had had an extramarital affair, and my wife had found out about it, and it was going south quickly. And like any good alcoholic, I was like, okay, I'll go to rehab. That's the problem, and I'll fix it, right? And it's funny, we were talking about this too. My ego carried me down to San Clemente, to a really nice beachside place. And I came out of there and I was sober for about a month and a half. And May of 2006, while I was in rehab though, I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous. I was introduced to a temporary sponsor, who I still talk to today. We're still friends. And I got a taste of this, okay? I went home, I was sober about a month and a half, and tension mounted. We had reconciled, tension mounted, and it just, I relapsed. I did what I know to do. I didn't really have any freedom, and I did what I know to do, And we separated within the first 30 days of separation. Sorry, honey. She filed for divorce, and we actually divorced for 2.5 years. I lost my job. I moved from a really nice house to a trailer, and things got really dark. And I stayed sober through all of that. I say that because through all those tests, I got really into Alcoholics Anonymous. I became a member. I was solid. I had sponsorship. I was working steps. And for about 10 months, I was with you guys. Okay. I got to an amends that, I got to the amends process, and there was an amends that I didn't want to make. It was to a former employer who I was a horrible employee. And my sponsor at the time said, well, you need to go make that amends. And I said, well, I don't want to go make that amends. And he said, I don't care, you need to go make that amends. And I said, yeah, I can't. I said, what if, her and I are separated and I'm paying child support, and I'm like, well, what if I go to jail? I can't pay child support from jail, and he said, you'll be okay. And I'm like, no, I can't do that. I'm coming up with all the reasons why, And he said, let me talk to my sponsor and I'll get back to you. And I said, good, because he'll talk some sense into you, right? So a couple days later, he comes back and he says, hey, I talked to my guy and we agree you need to go make that amends. And I thought, screw you both. And I did what's very dangerous in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I started taking a group conscience of everybody else. And I've been in sales my entire adult life, and I can sell you on what you need to say. So I'm going around and I'm saying, like, hey, what do you guys, hear me out. Like, what do you think of this? And the majority of people are like, well, you should probably go do it. And then somebody that I really respect and value said, it's a suggestion. You should probably go do it, but it's a suggestion. And all I heard is, you don't have to listen to that guy anymore, And I started backing back out of Alcoholics Anonymous. There's a spot in the 12 and 12 that talks about fear and pride, and that had conspired against me, and it pulled me away from him. It pulled me back. I started backing back out, and within a month and a half, I'm sitting in meetings and I'm miserable, and I'm critiquing everybody and judging, and I was living with a guy in the program who was just as miserable as I was. And I called him one day. I was driving home. I called him and I said, you want some Coronas? I don't even like Coronas. And he's like, yeah, that sounds amazing, right? And that set off 8 more years, 7.5 more years, yeah, of being on the other side. The amends story is important because I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So you skip forward about 1.5 years after that, and during that time there was some legal complications as a result of the consequences of my drinking, and out of the clear blue, right? It's so awkward with her sitting here. My wife and I stayed best friends through our divorce. We raised our kids together. We co-parented. We were always best friends. And she calls me one night. She calls me one night. And she's crying and she says, "I miss you and I miss us and I want our family back together." And I said, "Are you drunk right now?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Okay, we need to go to counseling and we need to date. We need to see if you even still like me. There's a lot of damage." And she said, "I'm willing to do that." And I said, "Okay." And I showed up the next morning for probation court. I was on felony probation at the time, and show up for court, and they locked me up for a week because I failed 3 drug tests, but not for drugs, okay? Because apparently Fresno County doesn't like when you drink either. And I was like, oh, I'm not doing drugs, I'm fine. And I started showing up to take my drug test drunk. And apparently that's frowned upon. So as a result of that, and I told you guys I was in sales, and God bless her, I explained that it was a misunderstanding, and they just didn't clarify what the parameters were of this, And went to jail and ended up losing the job that I had. Forgot this. So about the amends time, about the time that I was supposed to go make that amends, okay, that I didn't, life looked entirely different, right? I'd gotten a place again. I was dating somebody. I'd gotten this new great job. So it was kind of opposite from when I was new. I got shiny again. Everything's looking good. And then that amends came up, and that helped make it easier to say, nah, I don't want to do that. I got out of jail, and Meg and I start dating. Her name's Meg, sorry. We start dating, and we get back together, and my best friend's getting married in Hawaii. This is about 3 months later, and this is my powerlessness and my insanity. I have the opportunity to have my soulmate back. I'm working again. I got the job that I currently have. They've kept me for 15 years now. It's amazing. I get clearance from the probation department to go to Hawaii, okay, and be there for his wedding. And we decide while we're there that we're going to reconcile. We're going to get remarried, okay. And so we go to Hawaii. It's our second night in Hawaii, and we go to a luau, okay. And we're in line at the luau. Now, mind you, all the carnage and damage, I mean, this is fresh, right? And we're in line at the luau, and they're handing out Mai Tais, and I really like Mai Tais, okay? I mean, they're like free Mai Tais. And I immediately, in line, start selling it. And I'm like, babe, listen, okay? Hear me out, right? Like, I got 6 days before I have to drug test again. If I had it's free Mai Tai. If I have a Mai Tai, it'll be well out of my system by Monday, right? Because it's only like Tuesday or Wednesday. And this poor woman looked at me with a look that I will never, ever forget, of like sheer disbelief and disgust combined. Like, it was like, how is that even a thought? Right? And this is the difference. Totally normal person. Like, totally one of the most normal people I've ever met. And in my mind, it's making total sense. What I did at that point is I did not have a Mai Tai. I flipped it around, and I blamed everybody else and said, you're ruining my time, and it hasn't changed, and I probably made everybody miserable for about 3 hours, and God bless her, she still married me 5 days later. Over the next several years, I got off probation. I sold the fact that I could drink normally, and that progressed to, came to a head about 2013, somewhere in 2013. And I remember reaching this point of utter hopelessness, right? I told you guys that my mom died of cirrhosis at age 54. I was 39 at that time. And I decided that was probably what was going to happen to me, and I probably wasn't going to make it a couple more years. And I had accepted the fact that was okay. The family, all that, kids. I just came to this point where I knew that this is what it looked like, and this is how it was going to end. And 2014, I left one morning to go put, we had a travel trailer at the time. I bought a much larger travel trailer in case I ever had to live in it again. I went to put it back in storage, and I left the house about 7 o'clock, and I came home about 8:30, drunk, and went back to bed, because at that point, that's what I did. I drank and I slept. And I'd get up. And I went to work, and on the outside, it looked like it does now, okay? Internally, she actually described me one time as a shell of a person waiting to die. And that was very true. I went back to bed, and about 3 hours later, I woke up, and my dad was standing over me. And my dad lives about 3.5 hours, 3 hours away from us. And he said, "We've been asked to remove you from the house." And I thought, God, that sucks. And I got up and I grabbed some stuff and I left. And he checked me in. None of you guys are familiar with Bakersfield, but he checked me in to the Vagabond Inn on Olive Drive, which is like rough, right? But those are my people, right? I can have conversations at 2 a.m. with all kinds of people, right? And so when I'm in those depths, I mean, those are my people. And I continued to drink for 3 more days, during which time that I just walked back and forth to the liquor store, would buy a fifth of vodka until it was gone. The last bottle that I went to buy, it was a Sunday afternoon. I stood up and I was walking out the door, and I collapsed, and I split my head open when I hit the tile floor. And I was out for a while. I don't know how long. I stood up. When I came to, I stood up, and I remember looking at myself across the room in the vanity mirror, and I had like dried blood on me, and I just thought, God, this sucks. And I walked out the door like that. Like, I didn't go clean up. I didn't go, I walked back over to the liquor store. The guy didn't even bat an eye. He was like totally normal with this. And I bought that last bottle of vodka. That was a Sunday. Somewhere, and I didn't realize this until a couple of years ago. I was sitting in my psychologist's office a couple of years ago, and she says, we've never talked about those last couple of days. And so I'm like, oh, let's, go through that. And somewhere in that Sunday night, God removed the obsession from me, right? I didn't do anything. I didn't do anything. I was at a point in my life where I was open to the grace that was there for me, And I heard a guy say earlier that desperation met opportunity, and there it was. And I accepted that grace. I don't know what happened. I woke up. It didn't make sense. I didn't drink. There was still vodka left in the bottle. I woke up the next morning. I dumped it out, and that was it. And I didn't realize that. Like, for the first, I don't know how many years in sobriety, I'm like, yeah, I stopped. That was it, right? And then in retrospect, I see it being removed. And in that conversation with her is when that came up, and she said, rarely does an alcoholic stop drinking when there's alcohol, when he runs out, right? Rarely does he stop drinking when he runs out. And I thought, wow, that's amazing. We stayed separated for a couple weeks, at which time I immediately came back to Alcoholics Anonymous. She had asked me, do you need to go to treatment again? And I said, no, I need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. This is the solution for me, okay? I'm a guy that did treatment. I'm a guy that has chapter 3 talks about all these things. I've done them all. I'm a guy that has been in church drunk, like trying to find God, because that's what I need. I know I need this spiritual connection, right? That in and of itself is not enough for me. Nothing has ever cleared the channel to God like Alcoholics Anonymous. Okay? So I was sober. A couple days, and I start going to meetings, and I know I need a sponsor. I have 4 sobriety dates historically. I have 4 different sponsors historically, because it's obviously them, and that's not true. So I start putting this list together of what I expect, what I think I need, who I think I need in my life, because when you're new, you know exactly what you need, right? And it was my sixth day of sobriety. It was a Sunday night. I called a friend of mine who I'd been in treatment with uh, years before. He lived in Dallas at the time, and we're having a conversation, and he said, are you going to a meeting tonight? This is Sunday afternoon, right? And I said, I've gone to at least one meeting, sometimes two, every day this week, and we went to church that Sunday as a family, and I said, I think I'm just going to hang out here tonight. And like a good treated member of Alcoholics Anonymous, he said, do they have meetings on Sunday nights in Bakersfield? And I said, yeah, there's two. And he's like, you should go. And I said, well, it's this. And he's like, no, you should go. And I was like, okay, I'm done talking to you now. And I got off the phone, and I'm sitting there, and I knew he was right. I knew that I had no reason not to go. And so I went to a meeting that I hadn't been to for many years. And there was a guy leading the meeting that I didn't know. And the topic was on how you feel about God and early sobriety. And it gets around to me. I think we were just introducing the newcomer, and I took the meeting hostage like a good newcomer, and I started telling you the whole story. And then it was time for me to share, and I shared about coming back and kind of what was going on in life a little bit. And I said, but I've never been mad at God. I know I'm the one that always walks away. Got out of that meeting and went outside, and I wasn't comfortable because I didn't know a lot of people in there. I wasn't comfortable being like in the middle yet, right? It was still uncomfortable. So I walk over to my truck, but I stopped at my truck, and I didn't run. And I lit a cigarette, and I'm standing there by the truck, and this guy comes marching across the parking lot. It was the guy that led the meeting with intent and purpose, right? And Tim knows him, and he knows the intent and purpose this guy has in life. And he comes marching up to me, and he says, he doesn't come up and start telling me what I need to do. He doesn't come up and he just walks up and simply says, how are you? God, that altered everything. That altered everything for me and for countless guys since then. And I said, I'm kind of a smart ass. I said, I distinctly remember times in life that have been better. And he said, you're not mad at God? And I said, no. And he said, we should talk more about that. And I thought, this guy doesn't look anything like the sponsor list that I have. So we met the next night for cigars. We smoke a cigar. We're talking, and I asked him to sponsor me. He said, I would be honored. God placed me in a group of guys that are tradition-based, that are service-based. We went through the 12 steps. We went through the 12 traditions. We went through the 12 concepts. I'm currently a GSR for my home group. They placed me in, and it wasn't me, because that's not stuff that I do. I started a journey through the steps, and the second step, growing up, my mom drugged me through several different religions. We were Catholic for a couple of years. We were Jehovah's Witness for a couple of years. It was as a child, it's very confusing, right? Sucks not getting Christmas presents at Christmas. You don't understand that, right? It creates a resentment against organized religion. Through an inventory process, through going through step 4, what I came to understand is that she was looking for what we're given in here. And she searched for that her whole life and never found it. She never got that connection. She could never clear the channel. She could never, there's a guy down south named Ralph that talks about clearing the window, wiping the window, right? Clearing away the stuff that obscures God from me. And she never found that, and she died. We get to chapter 4. We're reading. I'm a line by line guy. This is how it was done with me. We read through the book line by line. I read. The sponsee listens. They hate this. But we get to chapter 4, and I said, well, so about this, right? I said, I'm not, and I ended up growing up Southern Baptist. I said, I'm not an atheist because I've always believed in God. And I don't think I'm agnostic because I've talked to, even in the dark, in the depths, I'm talking to God and I'm praying and I'm. And he said, then why doesn't your life look like somebody that has a God? And he actually used a 4-letter word in there too. And I went, wow, I have no answer for that. And he said, I would submit to you that you're agnostic and you don't know God. And it cleared the way for this journey to begin, for me to have this understanding and me to have a personal relationship. I'd always tried fitting it into what I was told I was supposed to believe. And I start this journey of clearing this stuff, clearing the stuff away that's blocking me. We go through this inventory process, and I get so many awakenings. I get to see so many truths and get freedom from some of the stuff that I've been carrying my whole life. Shortly after that, he said, okay, it's time for you to go sponsor somebody. And I said, no, it's not. It was eerily reminiscent of the amends process. And he's like, yeah, you have time and you have ability and you need to go find somebody to work with. And I said, man, I can't, I'm barely hanging on here, I don't know. And he's like, well, you should pray about it. And I said, perfect, because God knows I'm not ready, And I prayed about it, and 2 days later, I met the first guy. 2 days, and I knew as soon as I saw him, he came into a meeting, he was brand new, he looked a little banged up. I'm like, you got to be kidding me, it's 2 days. And I ended up, he was my first guy that I got to take through the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Since then, I have been able to work and see the light come on and the journey of many guys, and I'm grateful. Some of them are still here, some of them are not. I'm responsible for the action, I get to the amends process. I'm going to go through a couple of amends real quick. Made some amends and was given grace through that process that I don't deserve. I was given grace by my wife immensely. Some of the hardest amends I made. I think that first wife was pretty hard on me, and my daughter was really hard on me. And I didn't really see that coming. I knew that I'd caused a lot of damage as a dad. But we got to that, and one of the questions that I ask is, how did my behavior affect you? Because I want to know. I see it through my eyes. I see this entire perspective through my eyes, and this is how I see it. But what is the truth to them? And she's like, oh, let me tell you. And she gave me some insight into things. Made amends to my sister. I have a sister who I resented greatly growing up. Hated her all the way into when we were adults. Was horrible to this young lady. Just horrible. I was a horrible brother, and had her friends. She was 5 years younger than me. Had her friends bullying her in elementary school because I hated her that much, right? And I go to make amends to her. Into our adult relationship, we have this relationship where it's like we're texting at Christmas, and we'd see each other at holidays and stuff like that, and it was totally cordial. And I go to make amends to her, and I said, we go through everything, and I said, what can I do to make this right? And she said, she said, you're the only brother I'm ever going to have, which isn't true. My dad fathered a son older than me. He's out there somewhere. We don't know. She said, you're the only brother I'm ever going to have, and all I've ever wanted my whole life is to have a relationship with you. And she said, can we just have a relationship? And intuitively, because in my mind, I think we have a relationship, right? Intuitively, God came in and I asked the question. I said, what does that look like to you? And she said, I want you to let me know you're thinking about me. I want you to text me occasionally, not just on holidays, randomly. Just let me know you love me. I want to be part of your life. I want to know what's going on with your kids, right? She struggled to get pregnant for, I think, 15 years. I think she'd been married 12, 13 years, something like that. She's currently pregnant. She went through IV. She went through all this stuff. They adopted a child that didn't work out for a while. She called me before she called my parents to tell me she was pregnant, right? We have that relationship today. I went back to that employer, last amends story, I went back to that employer who I allowed to separate me from Alcoholics Anonymous initially. I went back to that employer and I was scared to death, man. Every amends went amazingly. And then the next one I'd go to make an amends, I'm like, this is the one that's gonna suck, right? I'm gonna get stabbed, I know it. And I go back to this employer and I call him. Never forget this. It was like Memorial Day, right around there. And I call him and I said, I left a message for him and I didn't hear back. And I think I left 2 messages. Then I went by, it was a car dealership. I went by the car dealership and I left a business card for him. And I said, please tell him to call me. It's not business related, it's personal. And a couple days later, and I haven't worked for this guy in 25 years at this point, okay? It's 2017. My phone rings, the number pops up, and I immediately recognize it. After 25 years, I'm like, oh God, here it is. And I answer the phone, and he said who it was, and I said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I worked for you back in the 90s. I need to come make this amends to you. I'm in a program, and it's time for me to make amends. And I set the appointment with him, and he says, yeah, I'm going out of town for a couple days. Call me on Monday or Tuesday or whatever it was. So I had days to stew on this. And I call him the morning that I'm supposed to go see him, and I have to leave a message, and he calls me back about 2 o'clock, and I miss his call, and he leaves a message. And my stomach's just in knots, right? And so I'm like, screw this, I'm just gonna drive out there, I can't do this. And I drive out there, and I catch him walking across the dealership showroom floor, and I said, hey, Steve, it's Justin. And he's like, oh yeah, and I said, can we talk? And he said, yeah, and we go sit down. And I said, and I had a habit through the amends process, and it took me a while to learn this. I was trying to manage my amends, right? Like I would write it all out, and I would be totally prepared. And sometimes I would try to leave that in my pocket and do this from memory, which is horrible, because if it's going good, I'm not going to tell you everything. And if it's not going good, I'm not going to tell you everything. You know what I mean? And so I start down this path, and I'm like, Steve, I got to stop you. I said, I got to do this right. And I pull this out, and I read this to him, and we talk about it. We go through the process, and we get done. And he says to me, are you in Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, I am. And he says, my wife's best friend's been sober 25 years in AA. And then he says, you being here is a big deal, isn't it? And I said, it is. I said, it is. It's a big deal for both of us, right? I learned right before I went to make that amends to him, I learned that entire process, like I get the freedom out of it. I get the byproduct, but I learned that I'm there for them, and I'm there, and whether you agree with this or not, this is my experience. I'm there to repair the damage that I caused. And as a result of cleaning that up, I get the freedom. You know what I mean? And they do too. And so he says to me, I said, and we start talking. He asks about, what I've done with my life, which I'm like, well, that's a long story. He says, and we're vibing now, right? And I said, I got to tell you that I was supposed to sit in front of you 10 years ago, And I was so scared of this moment that I allowed it to separate me from Alcoholics Anonymous. And he's a very religious man, and he said, "That's just crazy, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "That's just the enemy getting in your head." And if you believe in that, right, I believe the manifestation of that enemy comes in the form of self, right? It comes in that fear and that pride conspiring. It comes in the things that separate me from God and that block that channel. You know what I mean? It is my job to keep that channel open. The only way I know how to do that, and the only thing that I have found that works, is by practicing the principles that I'm taught in Alcoholics Anonymous. The things that you guys have shown me. You know, we talk about these tools and these spiritual principles and those things that have been given to me. That's the only thing I know to keep that channel clear, you know, and I'm eternally grateful. Thank you for my life today.